Hi everyone, welcome to the Community Safety Workshop. We'll, we'll give people a few minutes to join us and we'll get started shortly.
Hello?
Okay, Nadia.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Nadia, we can hear you now.
Okay. Sorry, I had to myself. Anyways, I'll go start. Hello everyone. We're just about start the Parkdale Community Safety Workshop, which will be hosted by Cassandra. We're just giving folks to join in the workshop. So please do yourself a favor and introduce yourself in the chat. And I would like to bring on Berlan.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Community Safety Workshop. My name is Baralan. I'm going to be one of the co-hosts this evening. We're going to give the people the opportunity to join us. So we'll wait a few more minutes before we start the suicide prevention workshop.
Do you want to read the next slide?
Hi everyone, you could introduce yourself in the chat.
Oh, hey everyone. You could introduce yourself in the chat, and we're gonna give folks a few seconds to join in. Okay, I'm with myself.
Nadia, if you're feeling comfortable, I think we can get started now.
Okay, we're gonna start the suicide prevention workshop, which will be facilitated by Cassandra Smith. You can mute and unmute yourself. Please remember to mute if you're not speaking. Take yourself on and off camera. Take yourself off camera if your Wi-Fi is unstable. In the participant tab, you can raise and lower your hand. You can also rename yourself, which is very helpful during group discussion. In the chat box tab, you can post comments and questions that we will raise during discussion. We will also post links here as well. We usually don't have a language interpretation, but if you need an interpreter, this is available. In your meeting controls, click interpretation, click the language that you would like to hear, whether it's Tibetan or whatever language you need. If you do need a language interpreter, please reach out to our member of our team, and we could get one interpreter to join the meeting. And optional to hear the interpreted language, only click mute original audio. We would like to gather the territories of Wendat and the two First Nations, the Seneca and the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. This land is subject to the two-row Wampum Belt Treaty and the Dish with One Spoon. Wampum Belt Treaty, a peace treaty between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee to agree to share the resources of the land as long as the dish never runs dry. Over time, indigenous nations, people, and settlers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of mutual respect and solidarity. As treaty people, we are committed to upholding these values in our organizing. Our group is dedicated to create an inclusive environment for all. We will not tolerate harassment of any form. If you witness or experience harassment, please inform a member of the organizing team marked by a star. We will also be offering breakout peer support space with an active listener. And I would like to call on is it Berlan or Anna Teresa?
Hi, Nadia. It's going to be Ana Teresa.
Okay, Anna Teresa.
I'll just quickly introduce myself. Hi, everyone. You can see that my name in the participants tab is actually Teresa Teresa. It has a little star on it. I'm going to be the active listener tonight. So if at any time you'd like a separate space just to work through some any kind of challenging emotion or experiences that you're going through, please do. You can actually private message me in the chat box, and then we can go into a breakout group or a breakout space and have some time to work through anything that you're going through. Thank you, Nadia. I'll pass it back to you.
Oh, one diva, one mic. Make space, take space. Oops, ouch. Be mindful of time. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot. Awareness of power and privilege. Patience and respect. Please note session will be recorded. And also I want to bring on Berlan to speak.
Thank you, everyone. Overview of the Parkdale Community Safety Workshops, learning session, suicide prevention, and then we probably would have a period of questions and answer, and then we're going to move on to the next steps. The Parkdale Community Safety Workshop series is being offered in partnership between the Parkdale Women's Leadership Group and Mutual Aid Parkdale. The Parkdale Women's Leadership Group is a collective of racialized women from Parkdale who are bound together to take action for human rights and justice. We were brought together through the Parkdale Leadership Training Series to organize in our community, and we created a harm reduction zine and a peer support space called Parkdale Wellness Drop-In. We aim to enlighten people's mind through education and empowerment. Together, we are building the tools, resources, and strategies to empower people's mind, address trauma in our community, and start the process of healing. MAPA is a neighborhood group organized on core principle of practicing solidarity in times of crisis. In responding to the pandemic, we have been safely reaching out to hundreds of our neighbors and checking in on them to see what material and social support they need. We are building trust, care, and commitment with zero judgment. The Community Safety Committee formed in response to acts of harassment in our neighborhood and growing calls to build alternatives to policing. We discuss ideas for how community members can keep each other safe, such as walk safe programs, rapid response teams, defending tenants during displacement or evictions, and other strategies to activate safer space throughout Parkdale. With the second wave of COVID-19 and sustained movements for racial justice and defunding the police, we have been hearing growing calls from community members to scale up and offer new forms of care and support in moments of crisis that do not rely on the police. Tonight's suicide prevention workshop will talk about how to have conversation with someone who may be suicidal, the common triggers that cause suicide behavior, the warning signs of suicide, how to get help for someone in crisis, how to get help for yourself or learn more about preventing suicide, community resources, and support services. Today, we want to welcome Cassandra Smith, who's gonna do the workshop on suicide prevention. And Cassandra, she works at Black Cap. Cassandra, welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Berlin. Thank you, Mercedes and Nadia, for having me. I'm going to be sharing my screen. I do have a PowerPoint, but as much as I'd like to, respect everyone's decision not to be on camera, please use the chat to engage if you'd like to ask questions, or, if you'd like to make a comment on anything that I'm presenting on, please feel free. Are you seeing my screen? Perfect. Okay, so thank you for participating in tonight's session. So suicide prevention is the name of the topic. And as I'm introducing myself, I'd like to introduce the work that I do and also the lived experience that I bring into presenting this topic as well. I'm currently the harm reduction specialist at Black Cap, which is the Black Coalition for AIDS Prevention. I joined their team in November of 2018, and I've been leading their Ministry of Health funded project. I also have lived experience with incarceration and substance use. I do a lot of public speaking on that topic. And I think that that brings awareness to that, in particular in the African, Caribbean, and Black community, speaking to women who haven't had the opportunity to share those experiences has been something that this work has actually given me the opportunity to do. So in doing this, in actually presenting this topic, this is the first time that I've actually presented this topic outside of my, let's say, work circle. So again, thank you for having me. And this is going to be a safe space for everyone. And in that, I'm assuring that as I'm sharing my story with you, I would like everyone to feel safe in engaging in this process as well. So a little bit about this session. We're going to be talking about how to have conversations with someone who may be suicidal, the common triggers that cause suicidal behavior, including the warning signs, and how to get help for someone in crisis, and how to get help for yourself and learn more about preventing suicide, and as well as connecting you to community resources and support services. Suicide is a sensitive topic to discuss. This session explores how we can support others, but please take care of yourself as well. So topics and situations discussed may trigger you. Turn off your camera, step away from the computer, send a message in the chat, and do what you need to do to be well. Please know that we're here to support each other. The COVID-19 pandemic is emotionally challenging for everyone, especially for individuals who are already at risk. For example, those who are suffering from depression. During and following the COVID-19 outbreak and the outcomes of isolation and quarantine, we might see an increase in suicide ideation and behavior among at-risk populations. Whether this increase will be in the short or long term or both remains unclear, but the mental health community should be prepared and can use this challenging period to advance suicide prevention. People are currently more able than in the past to talk about depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation. It appears that sharing experiences of negative emotions carries less stigma than it used to. Moreover, death has become a topic that all ages can more readily talk about, and it might be easier for people and mental health providers to ask directly about suicide risk. Second, people now understand the importance of social support in times of crises and tend to agree that it saves lives. So just defining some terms that are going to be used pretty often throughout the session. So suicide, as its definition, is the act or an instance of taking one's own life voluntarily and intentionally. Suicide ideation, or also known as suicidal thoughts, is thinking about, considering, or planning suicide. And empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference, or to place oneself in another's position. I remember someone asking if empathy can be taught. And I don't think it can, right? But you can also, if you don't feel empathetic, if you don't believe that you have the ability to feel empathetic, there's something called compassion. There's something about understanding and even just putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So if you could acknowledge that you might not have the ability to have empathy, think about the fact that in any position of vulnerability, you would want someone to have compassion for you. You would want someone to care about you. You would want someone to tell you, your life is important. I want you here. I want you at my next birthday party to turn up with me, you know, giving them a hug, letting them know you care, understanding that maybe on the next holiday when you feel like being by yourself, you could reach out to them because you know they're alone too. Like those are the steps that you can take, right? So empathy is something that can grow, right? I believe that. But Government of Canada, I just wanted to share an infographic because I think infographics are really neat in terms of having a way to share resources. And following the session, I put together a cute resource sheet that I'm just gonna send out that summarizes everything instead of sending this entire PowerPoint out. So those who do want that could share their email in the chat or however we share resources after the session, I'd be happy, which includes this infographic, to share it with you. But it was released by the Government of Canada, I believe in like 2019, but it will show how widespread suicide is. And the more you know about suicide, the more you'll understand why it's an important public health issue. Suicide impacts people of all ages and backgrounds in Canada. Every day, an average of more than 10 Canadians die by suicide. For every person lost to suicide, many more experience thoughts of suicide or suicide attempts. And for every death by suicide, at least 7 to 10 survivors are significantly affected by the loss. In Canada, the following groups have higher rates or risk of suicide: men and boys, people serving federal sentences, survivors of suicide loss and survivors of a suicide attempt, youth between the ages of 15 to 24. Second leading cause of death is actually the second leading cause for death for youth in that age bracket, and some First Nation and Métis communities, especially among youth. And they've also established the statistic in all Inuit regions of Canada. They've also said that women have higher risks of self-harm, which is a risk factor for suicide. Thoughts of suicide and suicide-related behaviors are more frequent among LGBTQ youth in comparison to their non-LGBTQ peers. This refers to those who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, two-spirit, or queer questioning youth. Now, I want us to take a look at these numbers and just think about the pandemic. Think about how COVID-19 has exacerbated any circumstance you could be living in. If you had a financial insecurity before the pandemic, it's multiplied now. If you had a weird landlord and there's some housing issues, that's probably worse now. And for the past year, because March has made it about a year since we've been experiencing this. So think about the past year for people who had these issues from before this started. So we've actually had to respond to that as a service provider, working with different groups in the community. I know these numbers have risen. And I know probably by the end of this year, we'll get some 2020 stats that will give us the actual numbers, and it's going to be alarming. I believe that because people aren't connected to the services that they're used to being connected to. Walking into a community center, being able to check in with that worker that, you know, you like how they make that chili. So you're gonna come in and when you know that they're cooking, and you can come in and talk to your friends and pick up your supplies. Like community centers, neighborhood and family centers, drop-in centers, them being closed has cut people off of a large chain of support that they're used to being connected to and connected to for a number of years, right? I don't remember the last time everything's been shut down before. So thinking about that and thinking about the fact that and COVID-19 as a factor within itself makes people feel more vulnerable to feeling helpless. There are also other risk factors that increase the risk of suicide, So there's usually no single reason someone decides to take their own life. Several factors can increase the risk of suicide, such as having a mental health disorder, but more than half of all people who die by suicide don't have a known mental illness at the time of their death. Depression is the top mental health risk factor, but others include bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, and personality disorders. But other factors can actually, and I wouldn't even say they would pile up, but these could be factors that people have experienced over a period of time and hadn't really had an opportunity to heal from or access support. So someone that had experiences with incarceration like myself, right? That was something that had happened to me about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. And I remember feeling that when I got out of prison, feeling very helpless, losing my family, losing everything that I had. I was more suicidal at that time than any other time of my life because I lost everything. But in some cases, you might see, you know, a chain of unfortunate events, a series of unfortunate events take place in someone's life where you're just like, wow, they're just going through it and going through it. Or sometimes people say, you know, bad news comes in threes, or things will happen, and you'll hear that happen in family conversations that also contribute to people feeling like they're doomed or feeling like there's no way out. So that also applies to other factors that people are experiencing when they don't have the ability to heal from their experiences, to gain support after they've, you know, been fired from a job, right? That impacts you. Losing your job, especially a job that you've, you know, maybe had for a really long time, or, you know, a job you thought you were doing really well at, and, you know, the layoff came out of nowhere and you don't know how you're going to pay your bills. Like, that's a life-changing event. Also, the history of being abused or witnessing continuous abuse is a huge factor. And usually when you talk about generational traumas and experiences that people have to internalize, it's usually abuse. Abuse by a family member, abuse by a partner. And, you know, in some communities, you know, there's, oh, you can't tell on the person, or the no snitch mentality, where even in my own experience, I had a partner who was physically abusive, and he's like, I can kill you and no one would care. And I felt even more suicidal at that time, but I remember feeling like I wish that he would kill me because I didn't want to kill myself. And that's kind of hard when you think about it, when you say, well, if you're suicidal, why didn't you want to kill yourself? It's because I didn't know how I was going to go through with it, right? But the amount of times he was threatening me and beating me up and telling me he would, and I had a history of being abused as a child, I'm just thinking that, okay, this is my life. This is what I'm going to experience. So this is what my life is going to be. I don't want to live here. I don't want to live. I remember having that feeling, but I remember feeling that feeling, remembering being bullied. I was bullied in high school, right? So even as I was typing these factors, I'm like, wow, this looks like things that I experienced. So when I think about other people and I think about how, you know, you hear that saying, we're the sum of our experiences, we really are, right? We could have substance use disorder history in our families or even within our own lives that we're affected by, right? Or family history of suicide, where you've lost a loved one to suicide and you've seen the impact that that's had on your family members and the impact that that's had on yourself, right? That's a heavy weight that you're carrying. And previous suicide attempts, if it's something that you've tried before, if the person's tried before and taken pills, and there's this feeling of, you know, I've come that far, I've tried, but something kept me here, that still doesn't keep that person kind of in that feeling of living, that's a huge risk factor, because that means that they might try that again. And having a chronic disease, wanting their life to end before they get so sick that they can't enjoy their life. Right? A social loss, such as the loss of a significant relationship. And when you think about, you know, breakups, people could be like, you know, on to the next, or back to the streets, and they laugh it off and play songs. Breakups are really impactful for some folks, right? It's life-changing. That partner could have been their first love, their first experience, the person that they came out with, the person that they lived with. You know, an end of a relationship could also mean the end of financial stability or someone that they worked with. It could be a connection to their job. It could be a connection to so many other parts of their life that they feel that that relationship leaves them without a life to live, right? And I've seen that happen in cases of folks that I'm supporting, where I have to reinstill in them that you have a life, right? And you can create that for yourself. And your life didn't end when that person left, like a new life literally began. Right? But these are the messages that you have to really drive in when you're having these conversations, what we're going to talk about a little bit later. Just going through the rest of the factors so, you know, we can get through the rest of the slides in time, because I really want, if people have questions, please, you know, let us know in the chat, and I could definitely answer them. Also being exposed to suicide. So having a family history of suicide and being exposed to suicide, that could be a little bit different, right? Because you could have a group of friends. There's people in schools that have suicide pacts, right? And I'm going to talk about romanticizing suicide and the social media influence of suicide a little bit later. But I think that's another thing, especially in youth, where they're seeing stories on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, about young people who were, TikTok stars and YouTube personalities that took their life, right? So they feel like there's something cool about it, or something that, makes it acceptable. That has also been a factor in suicide in youth, right? But difficulty seeking help or support, and that could have factors that are related to barriers to accessing services, or even geographical location, people having different cultural and religious upbringings where they don't feel comfortable coming out in their community and saying that they've had these feelings. Lack of access to mental health or substance use treatment, and following belief systems that accept suicide as a solution to personal problems. And that is more associated with like some type of like cult groups where they say, you know what, this is something we can all do and we can all be together and the afterlife is better. Like we've also seen that happening as well. So some of the warning signs. Suicidal talk. The person may ask you questions such as, how would you kill yourself? Talking about it, asking your opinion and advice is also a cry for help. Giving away their prized possessions. So it's a means of feeling that they're helping people when they're gone, but it's also a warning sign because there are things that they're usually really protective of, right? Maybe jewelry that you always saw them protecting and cleaning and only wearing on special occasions, and all of a sudden they're giving it to you. Changes to their will. If someone tries to write a will out of the blue, it would be helpful to ask them why. Obtaining a weapon, but that also paired with previous signs mentioned should serve as a warning. So not just someone that just goes out and buys a weapon, right? And we're just saying that in the respect of, in certain countries, weapons are pretty accessible. Like in the States, I believe you could still go in Walmart and buy a gun, right? But some people buy guns for hunting and different things like that. So in terms of kind of making that assumption, we're saying that that's a warning sign in like paired with other warning signs. And strange sleeping patterns. So this often occurs due to stress, restless thoughts, and personal problems that keep the person up at night. And that's not a sleeping disorder, right? That's literally the state of mind that they're in because of all the thoughts that they're having, right? So that's not a sleeping disorder. And we say that because a lot of people will respond to that with medication, and that's not the resolution, because there are feelings and discussions that they need to have where they need to be able to have a platform to get help, to seek support. So if they're being medicated, they're probably not going to be in the state of mind to really understand that the thoughts that they're having and keeping them up at night need to be talked about with someone else. But we also talk about coping and self-medicating a lot in terms of how people are coping with the pandemic. We're in the middle of an overdose crisis and drug poisoning crisis. We've seen overdoses rise comparably to rates in 2017. We're seeing higher numbers than we've ever seen before in areas that are underserved, but also all over the city, right? Because again, programs are closed, outreach programs have scaled back, they've had to adapt to the services, but people are definitely feeling that distance. But another warning sign is escaping with drugs and alcohol. And it may be used as a coping mechanism or a means to build courage to go through with their plans. Self-harm. So physical pain replaces emotional pain in a lot of cases for folks. So they'll feel better cutting, and that will give them that feeling of release. So sometimes you'll see scars, right? The after effects of that on their body. So another symptom, warning sign that you might see all of a sudden in the summer, the person's wearing long sleeves and, trying to cover up their arms and parts of their body that you might have observed cuts on before, and talk to them about that. Risky behavior, such as driving recklessly or picking fights. And suicidal tendencies, it's considered the #1 warning sign. It's the person has attempted suicide in the past. And also low energy levels. If you notice, this person used to go out to the gym, that would be my gym buddy or my Zumba buddy or my yoga buddy, and all of a sudden they don't want to go out with me, and they don't want to, they're not coming and talking on the phone, or they're just not, they're not their self, right? And you can kind of see when someone's going through that shift. And when you look at other factors, such as how the pandemic is impacting people's lives, someone could have lost their job, and there was, difficulty for people who were working part-time, self-employed to access CERB. That there wasn't a financial security for everyone. So you literally had people in a state of like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, right? And that helplessness is a feeling that you can't really replace in a conversation, but you can try. And when you try to have conversations with someone, when you talk about breaking the ice, you could start out by saying, I feel a little worried about you because, I know you lost your job last week. You were telling me about, that argument you got in with your boss. And, I was just wondering how you're doing, because you haven't really been, you could say reaching out when I call, or there could be something that you're connecting their usual behavior to that they've stopped doing, as opposed to really going into their personal life if they're not ready to talk about that. And you could just ask how you can offer support. I'm not too sure if anyone was asking any questions in the chat or if they had anything that they wanted to comment on before I go into the next segment, because we're going more into like how we can have conversations. But if there was any type of, anyone had any questions or comments on what I've talked about before, please let me know. So in terms of how to have conversations with someone who's suicidal, it's a really difficult thing to do because you're really looking at how you're kind of invading someone's privacy, but you need to know what's going on. So you have to be strategic about it, right? So there's a lot that you have to be mindful of. And these are just some pointers, because it's a difficult conversation. You're talking to someone about, feeling like you think they're going to end their life through what they've said to you, or seeing that they're impacted by all of these different series of events in their life, and they're displaying warning signs. So on top of that, you have an opportunity to have a conversation with them. And these are the things that you can be mindful of. Not asking too many questions, because this may cause a negative reaction. The interrogation technique is never effective. So just start slow, and that could be, hey, I texted you last week, or I sent you that meme on WhatsApp and you didn't respond, you good? Like, it could just be reaching out. But once they start to really divulge and let you know how they're feeling, don't give them false hope. False promises or everything's going to be okay will do more harm. So apply a realistic approach. Try not to relate. So do this by listening to the person and their own unique circumstances. And you might wonder why I say this, because in the beginning of this session, I told you a little bit about what I went through, right? My experiences being incarcerated, coming out, and just, even for that short amount of time, my life changed. When I came out into the world and I didn't have my children and I didn't have the life that I was used to, I was feeling helpless, but that was my experience. So when I talk about that experience, that's my space. So when someone's talking to you about their experience, don't come in and be like, yeah, well, I know this girl and she told me, yeah, she wanted to, no. Don't try to relate to it through your experience or anyone else's. Give them that time, even if they want to sit down and breathe with them, talk to them, say, you know what, let's listen to a song for a minute. But don't take that time for yourself. It's not your space to relate to them, because they're going through their very own unique problems, their own very own unique issues, their very own unique situations, right? And again, it's good to be able to have that relatability, but that could be a conversation you're having later, right? That could be a conversation once they've accessed supports, therapy, counseling, and the counselor says, hey, reach out to one of your friends and see if they've had these experiences too, and see if you could join a support group or a grief and loss group. That could be a conversation. That could be the opportunity where you and your friend can, or that person you're supporting could be, even closer by saying, look, I had that experience too, or I know someone that had that experience, and this is how I supported them, right? And I think that's really important, because we talk about, relatability, we talk about empathy, we talk about sharing stories of resilience, but when someone's talking about ending their own life, their life, just talking about them, needs all the time in the world. You need to give them that time. It's all about them, 110%. When you're talking about you, it's how can I help you? How can I support you? What can I do? Do you need me to get a ride so I can check on you? What do you need from me? It's not about me talking to you about anything that I've experienced, right? So also using their belief system to convince them. And this is why, because many world religions have traditionally condemned suicide because they believe apparently human life belongs to God. So when people have suicidal thoughts, they actually feel guilty to the religions that, if they've grown up and loved and maintained and continued practicing throughout their adult life, and or even through their youth, throughout their youth. Because I remember, leaving home and being a young person and still going to church, right? So I was very much connected to my faith, but also feeling very guilty because reading what, certain religious literature says about taking your life, they say it's a selfish thing, you should never do it. You're taking the power away from, whatever being that's the higher being. But these are thoughts. These are the things that you need to get support with. So wouldn't it be nice if, youth can go into the church and talk to their pastors about having suicidal thoughts? That space should be there for them, because, you think about a pastor or deacon or someone who's in a space where they're a leader in a religious space of worship, where they could really advise and give that guidance to the person. But if the religion within itself, the literature that they're raised to read, say, don't do this, don't have these feelings, or you'll be damned, or you'll be this, they're not going to tell anyone about it. So really reinstilling in them, if they believe in God, you're still a child of God, or whoever they believe in, they're still that loved by that being, that higher power still protects them, still guides them. If they still have that belief in religion, convince them to still have it. And encouraging them to see a professional. Remember, in cases that you aren't a professional, if you aren't, remember that you aren't. And if you are, remember that the person still needs to be connected to professional care and resources. So there's only so much you can carry in supporting someone who's suicidal, right? Because it's really impactful. It's going to impact you. You're going to feel sad for them. Depending on how you're connected to them, you're going to want to help in ways that they might not be ready for you to help, right? And you don't want to overstep any boundaries. So that can be an awkward moment. That could be a trying and troubling time for you as well, right? So in that case, connecting them to support actually gives you that break, and also that opportunity for you to connect with professional support if you need that as well. And this actually should have been first, taking them seriously. If no one pays attention, the person may be more inclined to take their own life. Studies show that most suicidal people display warning signs. So, you hear, oh, the person's, trying to get attention, or they're just, oh, it's the boy who cried wolf. No, each time someone says, I give up on life, I don't want to be here, take them seriously. Bottom line, take them seriously. And try not to seem fake. And sorry for the picture. This is, I'm just trying to associate most of the images to what I was talking about, but be yourself and don't act different because the person is expressing suicidal thoughts. So babying and a patronizing tone of voice and, oh, you okay, honey? And that type of tone, like, don't do that. Talk to the person the way that you usually would. Ask them more questions along the lines of, what they're willing to share with you, and be mindful not to be interrogative, but, ask them, like, how can I help? Is there something that I can do? Let me know, those types of things. Like, connect them to support through you. If they're not comfortable seeking support, say, hey, I can, do the 311 search, or check out, the city website and see what resources are available right now for you. Like, I could do that search, and that's not being fake. But the babying, the patronizing, that's fake. Being someone that you're not, because they'll see through it, and that will probably they'll make them distance themselves. Strategies, and so encouraging participation in culture. Strategies in some cultures encouraged people to sing songs, create art, and participate in customs. Belonging to a larger community alleviated feelings, it wasn't alleviated feelings of loneliness, but it took away feelings of loneliness. You didn't, when you're connected to a community, a larger community of people who you feel you belong to, right? How could you feel lonely? You feel connected. You know, it might be someone who, you know, knows that school you went to, knows you from the school that you grew up in, and you're connected through that cultural group. And now you can connect as adults. Like, you feel like you're part of a community. If you can include someone into a community group, if there's healing circles that take place in their cultural groups, or if there, you know, other support groups, or even community consults that bring out members of their community where they have a sense of belonging, where they can engage in conversation, encourage them to do that, right? Because that enhances their feeling of belonging to a group, to the world, and enhances their feeling of purpose. So just some key messages in conversations. And these are the things that you can do, right? Within your own capacity, right? So we're talking about opportunities that you have to talk to someone closely enough where you can have these conversations, but you don't want to assume that, you know, there's this, you have a psychiatrist session, right? But just remember these concepts when you're having these conversations. Addressing unresolved grief, because it's one of the biggest warning signs. Expressing wanting to see their loved ones or being with them again is a huge warning sign, right? And usually that loved one's birthday or around the time that they passed is also a trigger, right? So be mindful of the anniversaries, because those are really, really tough times for folks, and encourage them to address losses in their life. So again, there are grief and loss support groups, and sometimes it's a matter of, you know, visiting where that person is laid to rest, or having that feeling of closure. So whatever it is that they need to do to work towards addressing that grief, help them and support them in doing that. And monitor prescription drug use. Opioids particularly are common causes of overdose, and suicide's a common disclaimer as a side effect in drugs prescribed by doctors. So we'll see that, you know, in different commercials, you know, try this new prescription medication, may cause suicide, this, that, and all the side effects. Yeah, keep your ear open. Because if the person that's already experiencing suicidal thoughts is taking medication that has a suicidal side effect, that can impact them. And as I mentioned before, avoid romanticizing suicide. And this is more in, you know, we see a lot in like youth trending on YouTube and social media. Trending mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression occur often, and it could usually be led by youth influencers and suicide groups. As you see it, some young people will take an oath to all commit suicide together. So be mindful of the fact that most young people have TikTok pages, Instagram pages, Facebook pages. And as hard as it is for me to even get my 18-year-old son to add me as a friend, I need to have a window into his life to see what he's posting. So I think he finally let me follow him on Facebook, but nothing else. But I have friends that follow him on Snapchat and on Instagram. You know, so I make sure that I see what he's posting, because we've seen problematic posts in young people where they're posting, you know, pictures of them taking their life, or things that outlining plans of how they'll take their life on their TikToks, on their Instagram. And then you'll see comments and cyberbullying underneath where other youth are saying things like, oh, you're lying, you're doing this to get attention. And then you'll see a story come out in the news. So again, this is connected to taking the person seriously. Any and every time they're talking about taking their life, take them seriously. And just a myth about suicide. The idea that discussing suicide will make someone more likely to act on suicidal thoughts is just another myth. People who have the chance to open up about their thoughts and share their pain with so we could say empathetic or empathic listener, because, you know, sometimes in conversations we battle with that, but empathic is kind of the old way of saying empathetic. Right? So someone who, again, can put themselves in the other person's position. So someone who's an empathetic listener often feels some relief from the most overwhelming feelings of distress. So talking about it helps. Having someone that you know you can trust to talk about it, talk about your suicidal thoughts will help you in the way that it might not be that connection to the service provider you're ready for yet, right? So when you're having the conversation with someone, you say, look, it looks like you want to talk to me. I'm not going to impose talking to someone who's a professional. But if there's a way that I don't know how to help you, trust me enough that when I connect you to a professional, it's someone that you'll be okay to talk to. Because even that step needs to be a step of reassurance for them, right? You don't want to be like, oh, as soon as you start to talk to me about something deep, I'm just going to send you off to a doctor. No, I want to talk to you, but I acknowledge I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I want you to be connected to the best supports that you can be. So like, allow me and like, just trust me to guide you in the right direction to your resources. Like, have those conversations with folks. So I just wanted to take a break, if that's okay. Should I stop sharing my screen? And just to see how people are feeling, because I know I'm talking about a lot. And I hope it's just making sense in terms of how we can identify what the warning signs are and how we can have conversations. And these are just pointers, right? We're not going to have conversations where we're talking about people's family history and their current relationships and their employment all at once. But when you hear indicators like, I just lost a job, or, you know, just broke up with someone, and you notice that the person isn't taking care of themselves the way that they used to be, or they're not engaging, they're you know, a bit standoffish. And we can't really use not coming to family gatherings because we're not supposed to be gathering, but not answering phone calls. If they used to post social media, all those weird, annoying memes, you don't even see them anymore, you know, and you're hearing other things, or they might call you and they've drank too much and saying, well, I want to go, or they're saying something that just has you concerned. There are things that you can do, right? But also know that you can't do everything. And I know in a lot of cases where, you know, I've lost loved ones to suicide, a lot of us will sit down and be like, well, you could have reached out and they said that they wanted to be recognized and you should have, and there's a lot of blame. Like, there's so many factors that contribute to someone's feelings of just not wanting to be in the world, right? So even someone like you reaching out to them and saying, I'm here, it makes a huge difference. You can't change everything, but you could try to change something by just starting to have a dialogue, because that could be new. They could come from a family or come from a upbringing or a background where they can't have conversations. They could have been suicidal from teenage years, right? Because when we look at bullying is an experience that a lot of adults still carry. It's an experience that you usually don't get closure from. You kind of just have to brush it off and go through life, but you're triggered by other experiences where you might feel disregarded or lonely, or you don't even fit in as an adult. So you resonate back to that bullied child or that bullied teenager, and those feelings of depression come back. Like, it happens, right? So just understanding that we can't do everything, but there's things that we can do to support someone, and it's better than doing nothing. Believe you me, the one person that I reached out with at my darkest hour, I don't talk to her now, but I will always love her for answering the phone, right? I will always love her for doing that, because she didn't have to. She just put her babies to sleep. You know, she was just catching her Z's, and I'm calling her with all this. But that night, I really didn't want to be in the world, right? And she answered her phone, and she's like, what are you doing? Do you need me to come there? And she was like all the way in one end of the city, and I was all the way in the other end. And I'm like, you really would come? And it just gave me that feeling like somebody cared. Somebody wanted me to be here. And I kind of felt encouraged to stay. You know, obviously there were things that I had to work out, but in that moment, her answering the phone, her telling me like, girl, do you want me to come slap you upside the head? I'm coming to your house now. I'm putting on my clothes now, you know, bonnet on, driving on the 401 now. Oh, I will always love her for that, right? So remembering that even in that person's darkest hour, in that moment, they will always remember you. They'll always remember you caring. They'll always remember your words, right? And then if anything, heaven forbid, were to ever happen to them, you'll feel some type of way for not answering the phone, saying, why didn't I take that moment? And that guilt could terrorize you, it could haunt you, and you don't want to have that feeling either. So sometimes you're conflicted because you're thinking about, what do I have to deal with in my life? I have all these other issues. I'm going through a pandemic too. But some people, you know, life just beat them a little bit harder on their way up. So dealing with more problems on top of that, it's like, They need a little bit of push. They need a little bit of help. So just be that help. Even you being in this session today, you're trying to find help, find resources, find a way to support someone. You're taking the first step today, even engaging on a conversation where we're having this conversation about this topic. I don't talk about it every day. It's difficult even for me to talk about because I've had my own experiences with just not wanting to be in the world, right? Where you just feel like life is kicking your ass. You're like, what's going on? So if I could relate to that feeling, and I've come as far as I've come in my life, I think about what if I was where I was back then, going through a pandemic, fresh out of prison, lost my housing, riding the TTC different hours of the night, riding the blue night till the bus starts running again, carrying my one backpack, my one suitcase, my one purse, living my life out of those three things. Like I had, that was it. I lost hope. Imagine if that was my life now. We have to think about people that are they're going through things right now, right? We don't know how this pandemic's impacting folks. So if someone's reaching out, even if it's at 2 o'clock in the morning, you gotta roll over and close your eyes and just answer the phone. Answer the phone. Because that's what my friend did for me, right? So I won't talk to her now. I don't talk to her now, but I love her for that. Mercedes, did you want me to take a break or?
Well, maybe thank you, Cassandra, first of all, like, thank you so much for everything you've shared. And we do have 2 questions that have come up in the chat.
Okay.
One specifically from EM. EM, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please go ahead.
Trying to unmute. Yeah, so that is one question. I can't find my glasses, so I don't know if I wrote the right thing. But yeah, I wrote, right, so how do you like deal with someone who you know the signs are there, and like you try to talk to them, but they're like, after a while they just like shut you out. So in my case, I have like I think I've gotten to the point where I think that I'm an empath, so these things affect me. So I have a friend she's having a really hard time, and you know, I talk to her when my phone rings. She's gotten to the point now where she don't use her number, she put it on private. And she calls, so I answer my phone, but you know, I try, she's always bringing it back to me, and I'm like trying to tell her, so what is what is happening, you know, how can I help? And she's like, you have the perfect life, like you're doing this. But I'm just like, no, like I have my own issues, but she's always trying to bring it back to me. But and I'm beginning to feel like uncomfortable, because no, I don't know what to say to her, because I don't have the perfect life. I just deal with, like, I've come to a point where I can deal with my issues. So my question is really like, how do I like deal with it now? Like I don't want to stop answering calls, but it's getting to me. So how do I deal with it?
Okay. Yeah, and again, thank you for that. It's important that you take care of yourself, because you need to be okay in order to take care of your friend. So thank you for answering her calls. But again, thank you for also knowing when you've reached your threshold, right? She's reaching out to you for a reason. So I'm hoping that even in her observation that your life is perfect, maybe talk to her one day and ask her, what is it that you think is perfect about my life? And if she says it's the field that you're working in or the job that you have, try to encourage her to take, you know, a night course or take an online course in what you're doing, right? Connect her to the work that you're doing, the aspects of your life that maybe she feels are perfect, or things that she wishes she could do, that she might not feel she could attain, things that she could achieve. So maybe breaking down that conversation, because sometimes when people compare their lives to others, it's something where they just have their own feelings of loneliness and loss, and they want to fill that with the things that you might have, and maybe they feel that that will make their life feel complete. But it's really about assuring her that her life has so much richness and so much to look forward to. And maybe she needs to be connected to what her passion is. Ask her what she's passionate about, you know, ask her if she wants to bake with you one night on the phone and you video camera with her and bake something. Say, you know, go order these groceries and make them delivered to you and we'll make, you know, apple crisp tonight and things like that. I've done that with my friends. You know, we've done baking nights. Those are the things where maybe she can.
That's what we spoke about last night.
Sorry? Hello?
Did I lose a connection?
I could hear you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. But I've like done stuff like that. Like actually last night I said to her, because she's like, "Oh my God, you're writing a cookbook." I'm like, "Yes, so you can join." Like I have a group that I speak with women on Saturday nights, and I'm like, "You can join." I invited her like twice, and she never showed up. Like, so now I don't like. I just don't know. I don't know. But you know, thanks for the information that you give.
No problem. And yeah, like maybe you've tried all of those things and it's like, what else is there, right? So there are ways where she might not be open. If she's not open to coming to a group, she might not be open to being connected with support, but there are different, like there's a chat line where you can chat on your phone, like text, and get support. So I'll share those resources in the end, but even if it's a matter of sharing those resources with her and saying, I just want you to have these because I'm worried about you, because I love you. I'm not judging you. I'm not saying anything. I want you to be here, you know, just letting her know how much you want her to be here with you and saying, this is why you're connecting her to the supports, because they're pretty unique, right? You can do like an online chat, you can do a texting, and you can do an like a hotline call. So however she's comfortable with engaging, and if she's comfortable, you can offer her those supports too. So again, I have like a little fact sheet that I could share at the end for those who want that emailed to them, and I have some at the end of the presentation. Did you say there was 2 questions?
There was another one. Dora, if you feel comfortable unmuting and sharing a bit about what you're adding in the chat, please go ahead. Oh, Dora, I can see you speaking, but you might be muted currently. Oh, it might just be that your audio is not connected. So if you go to where your mute button is, right at the bottom left of your screen, there should be the option to connect to audio. And maybe I can see you getting headsets. Let's see. That's still not working, unfortunately, but maybe Dora, what I could do is just read out your comment in the chat. And if you want to add anything, you can add it to the chat as well, or try to connect to your audio, which once again, if you just go to the mute button in the bottom left corner, there should be the option to switch your audio channels, which might be the issue. But Dora shared in the chat, I know already 2 persons that wanted to give up their life, a mother and a daughter. I keep calling every single day to try to give her motivation. Is there a specific question, Dora, within that that you had that you might want to add to the chat? Yeah, so I think it's seeming, Cassandra, if you can see in the chat, it sounds like it was someone who has cancer, who's been facing challenges, and I think Dora's just trying to say, you know, like I'm reaching out, but what else can I be doing? And I know you've kind of shared some tips, but
Yeah, no, and again, like chronic illness, like terminal illness, like those types of, like for people to really understand life after being diagnosed with a terminal illness is really difficult, especially if a doctor is saying, well, we're projecting these amount of months. You kind of are just like, I've given up. But then to have that feeling of not wanting to be there, and then the daughter feeling the same way. So even if the daughter's having feelings, was that what the person had mentioned, that the daughter is having feelings as well? Because then you'd think to connect the daughter to support, you can connect with the mom. But if the mother and daughter are both having those feelings, then I think it would be a good idea to connect to the extended family. So if you are connected to like the aunts, the cousins, and saying like, look, Like, this is something where we all need to collectively be there for them. In some cases where we, like, even in just assessing if someone's a harm to themselves or if they're attempting to harm themselves, and you say you want to call 911, but you're afraid of how people are treated in the hospital, connect with their family, right? Because when families come together and loved ones come together, and we're talking about chosen families as well, right? People who are connected, loved ones, that network, might have to be, you know, Facebook friends where you see them responding like, hey mom, happy birthday. So you know it's their mom, and you know, like, that might be it. You might have to reach out and make those kind of those awkward introductory calls and messages, but you're doing anything and everything, right? Anything and everything. Because there are people who obviously you'd think the first connection to support, especially for the daughter, would be the mother. And so the roadblock hits where the mother needs support as well. So you have to think about how you can support them both, but respecting their privacy as well. Look within the family first, right? Because when we look at people's interactions with hospitals and medical providers, a lot of the time they've had really negative experiences, especially if they've gone in before expressing these thoughts and their families had them hospitalized and put them on a form or whatever it is, or they're in the psych ward for X amount of days and coming out medicated. Like, that's been experiences for a lot of folks who've expressed suicidal thoughts as well, where their family hasn't had the capacity to support them. So really connecting to the supports, like, please reach out to me. I have like a huge network of service providers that we can all support you in supporting the person and supporting the family. You know, we can all come together and support them. Like, this is what we are here to do, right? It might be phone calls, and it might be Zooms, and it might be, you know, checking in, sending groceries. Like, we're connected to supports like that, but just anything that makes them really understand that people want them here, and people will fight for them to be alive and to be well. Like, we're in the fight with them, you know? So connect with services. I'm gonna share my email at the end as well, because again, we only have so much within us in terms of our personal capacity, and then we have to connect with other support. So I consider myself to be a support. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a professional. So I would be happy to connect you to the counselors that the person might need, or just that one-on-one support for her and her daughter. And they might need to do that separately, right? How are we doing for time? I just have a few more slides, but we can just keep going, and then at the end we can do some more Q&A.
Yeah, does that sound good to folks?
Okay, thank you. So steps you can take to support someone who's suicidal. You may have to take unique approaches to support. So here are some ideas. So number one, and we'll say it again, take them at their word. It's a common myth that people talk about suicide to get attention. And while this isn't the case for most people, it's always best and safest to assume the person means what they say. Brushing off their mention of suicide invalidates their distress, and they may feel reluctant to share their thoughts with anyone else or reach out for professional support. So negating their feelings, that can create a barrier for you to then come in and say, oh, I think you need to talk to a doctor. Because then they might say, well, remember the first time I told you I wanted to kill myself and you told me I'm lying. Like, those things do more harm, right? So being mindful of how you react even on the onset of the person expressing suicidal thoughts. Instead, they might continue carrying their pain in silence, believing things will never improve. Pay attention to their language and behavior. People often talk about suicide in vague or unclear ways. Your friend could say things that reflect a sense of shame, hopelessness, or failure. They may not say, I want to die or I want to kill myself. Instead, they might say, I just want the pain to stop. I don't know if I could go on. I'm a burden to everyone. I'll never feel better, or life will never get better, right? These signs don't always mean your friend is thinking about suicide, but it never hurts to have a conversation when their actions or language concern you. And ask them directly. You can assess immediate risk by asking a few important questions. First, confirm they really are thinking about suicide by asking, are you really thinking about ending your life? And if they say yes, ask, do you have a plan for how you do it? Or do you already have the things you'd use? Right? And I would say these questions would be, if you've already been able to have like one-on-one personal conversations with the individual, right? Because they're pretty invasive questions, right? Like, do you have a plan? Do you have the things? But if they're already on a rapport with you where they talk to you, they might be comfortable sharing that. Then ask them what and where those items are. Check whether they have a timeline in mind by asking, have you thought about when you'd end your life? Not everyone who thinks about dying has a plan or the means and intent to carry out their plan. Someone who says yes to all of these questions and has a clear time frame for dying, however, needs immediate support. So as soon as if any of these questions you can tick off and say, well, someone said yes to all of these, there are supports in these slides at the end of the presentation that we can definitely connect them to. Encourage them to talk about it. So when someone mentions suicide, you might believe avoiding the subject entirely and encouraging them to think about brighter things that will help them feel better. It's normal to feel scared or uncertain of the best response, but shying away from the subject won't help either. The person might take your avoidance as a sign you aren't comfortable talking about suicide. They might also get the message that you don't appreciate the depth of their pain. Even when it's not the case, in either case, they might stop confiding in you. And offer compassion. When talking to someone who's having thoughts of suicide, what you say really matters. You don't want to deny their distress or ask things like, how could you possibly feel that way? Or why would you want to die? You have so much to live for. Because there's underlying judgment, right? You're denying their feelings. You're negating the fact that their experiences are making them feel like they don't want to be in the world. Trying to solve problems for them usually won't help either. What might seem like a small fix to you can seem insurmountable to someone in a crisis. So again, a breakup, an end of a relationship, or an end of a job, some people can bounce back from, and they bounce back in different ways. So, on the observation of others, according to others, they're fine, but inside, they have different feelings, and that their drinking might have increased, or they might be engaging in high-risk behavior as a way to, just express themselves as an outlet. But most importantly, validate their feelings. To validate their feelings and offer hope at the same time, try doing things like this, saying things like this. That sounds so painful, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. How can I help? I know things seem bleak now, but it can be hard to see possible solutions when you feel so overwhelmed. So validating, acknowledging their experience, and telling them, I'm concerned about you because I care, and I want to offer support however I can. You can talk to me, right? When you say someone that you can talk to them and then, you might ignore their call, they might not reach out to you again because they want to call someone who's going to answer. Even that feeling of calling someone and they not answer, the other end doesn't pick up, that you feel unwanted, you feel negated, right? So, put suicidal thoughts on top of that. That person wants to feel acknowledged. They want someone to reinstill in them that they're wanted here, that their life matters. Instead of saying you need to get some help, try, have you thought about talking to a therapist? Or I'm always here to listen, but do you think a therapist could help a little more? And that's a way of encouraging people without judgment. So some more steps you can take is continuing to offer support. So it doesn't just end at one conversation, or when you give them a 1-800 number or a link to a Google. If a person has thoughts of suicide but no plan or immediate risk, they may feel a little better after sharing their distress. This doesn't mean they're completely fine. They may continue to deal with suicidal thoughts until they get help addressing the underlying concern. Staying in touch with your friend can remind them you still care even after the crisis has passed. Check in on how they're feeling by saying things like, hey, I've been thinking about you. How are you doing? Remember, I'm always here if you feel like talking. And if you can, and again, this is something that, some folks have difficulty accepting, but when you're able to encourage professional support, also know that you can also support them by encouraging them to talk to a therapist about lingering or recurring suicidal thoughts, and that's acknowledging that you don't have the capacity to help them move forward after you reach a point of, you've answered all of the phone calls, you've tried everything that you can do, but you don't want to kind of just leave them in the lurch, right? Just remember, you can't force them to go to therapy, no matter how deeply you believe it would help. It can feel pretty upsetting to watch someone struggle alone, but telling them what to do may not work. These suggestions show your friend you care while gently reminding them of your limits. You probably can't offer any real solutions to their distress, but therapists are trained to support and help people having thoughts of suicide. If the person seems reluctant, try offering to help them find a therapist or take them to their first appointment. Another thing you can encourage is lifestyle changes. So in addition to talk therapy and medication, suicide risk can sometimes be reduced by simply adopting certain healthy habits. These include avoiding alcohol and drugs. So staying away from alcohol and drugs is critical, as these substances can lower inhibitions and increase the risk for suicide. And so these are in the cases of people who are self-medicating and using substances to cope, right? I'm a harm reduction worker, specialist, peer, everything else. I believe that you can use substances safely, use them for pleasure, use them for different reasons, but when you're using them to cope, you're more vulnerable to being in danger, right? So there are more harms presented to you when you're using and abusing alcohol and other substances as a means to cope and self-medicate. So I just want to be clear about that. Exercising regularly. Exercising at least 3 times per week, especially outdoors and in moderate sunlight, can also help. Physical activity stimulates the production of certain brain chemicals that make you feel happier and more relaxed. And sleep. So sleeping well, it's also important to get enough quality sleep. Poor sleep can make many mental health symptoms much worse. So talking to their healthcare provider about having trouble sleeping, if you've seen that in their warning signs, is also important. And also remember, you need support too, right? So this is impactful. Supporting someone who is suicidal, someone that you care about, someone that you can't even imagine what life would be like without them, and the impact that that has on you, it's pretty heavy. So understand that there are programs available for you. An opportunity to build with service providers by connecting with their grief and loss programs that they've been holding to share experiences. I know there's a new harm reduction, grief and loss support group. They're actually meeting on Zoom right now. So their meeting conflicts with ours, but I believe it's actually every Wednesday. So I'll be sharing those resources as well. So different support groups are happening right now, right? And there's a Facebook page for the support group where they share different songs and art and memes. So connecting with people and community is really important, but also your family and friends, and not to talk about work and not to talk about the people you're supporting, but just to relax and unwind. So spending time with loved ones and engaging in activities and hobbies to recenter yourself, right? Like I love having fried chicken cook-offs with my son because he feels like he's the best at making fried chicken. So I'm like, okay, let's cook, like these are the things that you need to do. And it's, again, not talking about work, not talking about what you are, again, and definitely respecting the privacy of the person that's confiding in you. You don't want to be discussing their circumstances with others, but also discussing the impact with others. It's not separating that time for your family and friends time. And professional help is there for you too. So seeking help is okay, and accessing therapy and counseling services, because you're also impacted. The impact you could also be traumatized or triggered by the impact of hearing someone's experiences, especially if they resonate with your own. So we're talking about COVID-19 and all of the other vulnerabilities that it presents for folks that are already isolated due to homelessness or their location, and then further isolated from the programs and supports that they need. So a lot of the resources that are being offered are online, and that could present a barrier for folks who don't have access to the internet. But as people who are supporting them, as those that do, I think there's just some things that we could be mindful of while navigating these online resources, because we want to connect people to supports that they can trust, right? Supports that will take care of them. We don't want people to be further traumatized. So my referral network is super important to me. So when I want to know that when I'm sending someone somewhere to get help, they're going to be treated the same way I treat them. They're going to be cared for just the same, right? So assessing Access is important. People at risk for suicide can now get psychological help online, which might be more accessible for various reasons, reducing stigma and removal of transportation or time barriers. So you could also say, you know, hey, you don't need to load your Presto to go see a counselor. Like when you're talking about the benefits, you could, you know, tell them while you're helping them navigate through these online resources. And the assessment. So the medical community needs to make sure that online providers can assess suicide risk and provide specific suicide prevention interventions. So look at that as well. When you're Googling the provider, see if they're actually like providing interventions, connecting people to support and services. Try not to find like a link that's like $350 an hour psychiatrist, but you don't see aftercare or any type of follow-up plan or any, you know, linkage to care. And direct. So mental health providers should now directly convey to every patient that in any case of severe crisis, they should not hurt themselves. So that we're saying that to say, you know, in some cases, calling 911 is what you need to do, right? If someone's is going to hurt themselves, or they say they're hurting themselves, if they're around a weapon, you're observing them hurting themselves, that's another thing, knowing when to call 911. So these resources are great. We can share as much numbers as we want, but knowing when to call 911 is important. So I think that's my last slide, but a variety of supports are available via telephone and online. I highlighted these three in particular because the Canada Suicide Prevention Service is a national network of existing distress, crisis, and suicide prevention line services, and it's available 24/7. And it's also, that's for voice calls, and also available for text between 4 p.m. and 12 a.m. So, but the chat support isn't available now because I actually looked at the updated version of the site. I like to update my resources. So I'll check back in with the site maybe in about a week and update the resource sheet and share that link online if the chat service is available by then. The Distress Centers of Toronto has a 416 number, and they offer, as appropriate, emotional support, crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and linkage to emergency help when necessary. And these services are offered in 151 languages. And the Gerstein Center, they have crisis workers available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where they work out some effective ways of addressing immediate difficulties and connecting individuals to services that can offer ongoing support. They encourage self-referrals so that they can hear directly from people about what they're going through. So in that case, you can support that person in calling the Gerstein Center themselves, right? But also knowing in emergency situations, if someone is in need of urgent medical or psychiatric attention in an emergency or in a crisis, visit your local emergency department, general hospital, or 911, and the non-emergency calls for Toronto Police is listed below. So in this case, these are the cases where someone's in immediate danger. And again, I just wanted to share more crisis and helplines. The Kids Help phone also has a text service and a chat service. And I have the website there as well. There's a Trans Lifeline, Hope for Wellness helpline, Residential Schools Crisis Line, and Canada Suicide Prevention Service. And that's also offered in Quebec. Today, many organizations and people are working hard on suicide prevention, and there are more resources available than ever. No one should have to deal with suicidal thoughts alone. Whether you're a loved one who's concerned about someone or you are struggling yourself, help is available. Don't keep silent. You may help save a life. Thank you for having me, and I can take any questions if people have them, and I'll just stop sharing. I could share my contact information if you would like me to support any community members or support you while you're supporting community, or however we can connect to take care of our loved ones together. Thanks, Mercedes, and thank you, Berlan and Nadia.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. And maybe what we'll do first, I see Berlan already unmuting herself. Maybe we can ask if folks from Mutual Aid Parkdale or the Women's Leadership Group have any questions to start. So Berlan, go for it.
I was unmuting Mercedes to say thank you to Cassandra. Awesome. Thank you very much for the information. I don't know, I remember, I had a friend who had reached out to me and to say, he had thoughts of suicide. So I'm just thinking, it's like, so then the pain of it of just thinking that somebody wants to take their life, especially somebody who you care about, in your community, a close friend, it's really hard. So I'm just thinking, what do you do in times like that? How do you cope with it? And how do you function? Knowing that somebody is in such, deep pain to the point where they don't want to survive.
Yeah, it's hard because it's a pain that, you wish you could take away, right? We want to know how to make our friends feel better and our loved ones feel better. But literally in that moment where he's able to engage with you, even if it's you calling him and saying, oh, I'm making this pot of soup, call me on video and you can see it, and talking to him and sending him some, and, just connecting on that level, giving him that sense of feeling that you care about him. That will matter to him, because again, what we carry, the load we carry, maybe he's suffering and feeling things from way before you knew him, before you met him, right? So you can't really fix all that's hurting him and all that's impacting him, but he's reaching out to you. He's connecting with you for a reason. He feels something with you where, you make him feel like someone. So I appreciate you for doing that. And again, that you're going to feel sad. You're going to sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and wonder if he's okay, right? So even in that moment, call him, send him a text, right? Just be like, you good? You okay? Reach out to him. That he'll remember those things, right? Because again, when someone's lonely and they're feeling unwanted, they feel like they don't want to be in the world, they also feel like the world won't miss them. Right? But he'll also remember Berlan. Oh, Berlan has texted me every Sunday, or she texts me every weekend. Geez, but he'll look forward to that Sunday where Berlan texts him. Right? So like, these are the things that you might not see make an impact, but it matters and it keeps him going.
Thank you, Cassandra. I'm curious if any of the folks with Mutual Aid Parkdale might have any questions, maybe of specific scenarios you've run into and in some of the supports you've been providing, or just general questions you might have to Cassandra.
Well, I can relate to bullying. I was bullied when I was a young kid. So even the teachers bullied me. And yeah, there are times, yes, I was feeling like to give up. But I had to talk to people and reach out to people and just to stay strong. My mom, she had to be involved. I did tell my mom, and my mom was like very furious about the situation. So yeah, I can tell you about my situation as a young kid. And people tell me things, but I just ignore them. Like some people tell me about my weight. I don't know. Some people don't like that when you tell them about their weight. So yeah.
And thank you for sharing that, Nadia. And I appreciate you connecting to my experience being bullied. I think that even you saying that you know how to, brush people off and say, well, I don't care about what you have to say now. There are young people that would love to learn how to have that strength, right? So when there are opportunities for you to offer support, please do that. Show them how you've, built yourself up to be this great person. Because remember, you're the one that reached out to me to do this workshop, and you're so organized, you're so friendly on the phone. I was like, you're awesome. Like, I just loved engaging with you. So I know there are some young people that would love to have that opportunity to learn how, you rose above that. And again, I'm sorry that that was your experience, and thank you for relating to mine, but like, I'm sorry that you experienced that. And I always say, when people make comments about me being fat, I'm like, that's okay. I like being fat. If you don't like me being fat, that's not my problem. But I remember, being an age where I couldn't do that. I put my head down. So, that's what, we can show other people, right? There's a way that we can brush off those comments, but it's hard to do, right? It takes time. So you've evolved to this level of being able to impart that wisdom. So I hope you do that. I hope you do that.
Thanks again, everyone. I'm going to open it up maybe a bit more broadly and see if there are any other questions coming for folks. And maybe one thing also we can reflect on, Cassandra, one thing that I loved that you brought in was thinking about what kinds of community supports look like when we're actually thinking about suicide prevention, because so many of those underlying factors that can really contribute to how people are feeling are things like housing, supports, community, access, like all these kinds of pieces that maybe we can start to think about collectively what that support looks like in Parkdale specifically. So if folks also have reflections about, what does suicide prevention look like on a community scale? Would love to hear what you guys think.
Can't get my video to turn around here. It's turned around the wrong way. I'll try. I can't see. Hold on a second. Okay.
I had a quick question around, hi Cassandra, thank you so much for sharing your presentation. I learned a lot. I had a quick question about confidentiality.
Yeah.
If someone's sharing their feelings with you, very challenging feelings, and you're not sure what to do, and if you're not a professional, what do you do? When is it the right time to reach out to other people, ask for help? Do you talk to the person first, let them know that you think you should be asking for help? Any tips that you can give would be great, Cassandra. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that. My apologies for not including that. There was just so much I was trying to cover, but the confidentiality piece is huge too, because if someone's disclosing or just even opening up to you that they're having suicidal thoughts, the first thing that they might say is, I'm going to tell you something, but don't tell anybody, right? So you'll feel conflicted because your first inkling, your first feeling is like, no, I got to call the police. I got to call a doctor. But you might have to tell them, look, if you tell me you're going to hurt yourself, I want you to be okay. So I'm going to have to call the ambulance, or I'm going to have to bring you to the hospital. So like what's going on in that sense, right? But when you're getting information about, let's say, their childhood traumas, their past history, and things that are impacting them, I think that that's also important to know that you keep that to yourself. And in their therapy and counseling process, the appropriate people will know that information as well. Because I think in them confiding in you, it's their way of building trust, and that's your way of building your rapport with them. But in breaking that trust, they could also hear you telling someone else something, right? Where they're like, okay, I'm not going to open up anymore. And that creates a barrier. So if they express to you that they're going to hurt themselves, I think it's just really important for you to know that let them know that you're going to call the police, because you want them to be safe. You don't want them to hurt themselves. And if you can't stop them from hurting yourself, like, you literally have no choice but to do that. But you don't want it to be so cut and dry. But when it comes to that type of information, like, you have to take it seriously, right? So that's even where I'm conflicted, because I never believe that the first step and the first choice is to call 911 or call any type of authority. Because when you look at how the mental health community is treated by, authority as different types of, anyways, that's a different conversation. You're expressing people to even more vulnerability and harm. But at the same time, again, this is all part of like taking their what they're saying seriously. And if they say that they're going to hurt themselves, you just want to make sure they're in an environment where they can't. I hope that helps, Teresa. Okay.
Thank you. And I'm just going to give space once again if there are any additional questions. We can close this call early as well. Of course, it's a heavy topic, and so I'm sure a lot of people are sitting quite a bit with this. And there also might be things that people don't feel comfortable sharing in a broader space too, and a recorded space, and we're very aware of that. So also, if there are any follow-up questions you might have, or questions you might have where you do want us to pause the recording, we can do this as well. But just did want to open up a little bit more space before we close out tonight if there are any final questions.
Something I want to mention, Cassandra. Sometimes, like I was looking at some of the signs that, in the slides, and I was thinking sometimes, it might not necessarily be that a person might be suicidal. Maybe they're just sad too, and, but I know with depression, it's a prolonged sadness that turns, to depression. But I was just thinking sometimes people might just be sad, and, so they, like sometimes, they might be depressed. So they might be sleeping,
Yeah.
for short periods of time or a long period of time. Or sometimes, they could be drinking, not necessarily to kill themselves, but, so then they just want to escape.
No, depression, it's real, right? It's winter. Every time you look outside, if the snow's not falling, the snow's everywhere and everywhere is ice. So, that impacts a lot of people's moods and feelings as well. So really knowing if someone is suicidal, like through like the indicators and the triggers, and them even verbally indicating that to you if you see signs that they're cutting. But yeah, and there are other different types of feelings people are having with coping with the pandemic and already feeling isolated. So if they're already inside all day, they might just be sleeping all day because of that. So that's why it's important to have conversations. And it might be a series of conversations, but have the conversations, Yeah.
Yeah. And I like what you said, ask them, like, you don't want to, pry into their business, and pressure them, but, ask. And, I like to say, if you need me, I'm here, So
That's the best thing. It's the best thing.
Because some people might not want to talk about it, talk about what they're experiencing. So sometimes, I know for one, at times I'm experiencing sadness about my situation, and I just don't want to talk about it. So some of my appear strong, but of course, there's tons of way I cope. I learn to cope, so.
And we all cope.
But the pain is real, the pain, it's not easy, so.
But like even sharing the ways that you cope with someone that's having difficulties too, right? That could be a way of support. Like when I'm stressed, I watch Judge Judy. Watching her cuss everyone out just makes me feel good. So that's my coping, but the people around me hate it. They're like, I'm tired of listening to Judge Judy, but we all have our ways of just releasing, right? And just feeling and restoring and recharging. So maybe even in that conversation, how you recenter that could be how you're telling your friend, I had, about your feelings too, because maybe he doesn't know that you might relate to some of the feelings he's having, right? So you could tell him how you're coping.
Or one more, so then I have a relative that, would make the comment, oh, I'm going to go walk in front of the streetcar. How do you, I sometimes might be taking like a joke and we laugh it off, but what do you think? What do you make sense of that?
I think, well, you don't want to wait for the next time they mention it. Like maybe the next time you see them, be like, this ran across my mind the other day when I saw a streetcar, you said something about that. Like, were you okay that day? Like, what was going on? Because then they'll remember that you remembered them and you walked away with that feeling. And maybe in that space, they might have been around others. So you might not have stepped out of the crowd and been like, hey, are you okay? You might not have had that opportunity to have that one-on-one engagement with them, but definitely check in and be like, you okay? I remember last time you talked, you made that joke about the streetcar, but just something didn't sit right. Just make sure you're okay. And nothing's wrong with that, right?
Maybe I could say, were you joking or are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks again, Marilyn. Cassandra, one question that did come in was folks were wondering if you are able to share the resource sheets and numbers that you were mentioning.
Yes, I can. Should I just email it to you and then you could share it. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, usually just for folks on the call, what we usually do after this is we'll send out a reminder through Zoom where we'll share the evaluation form, the link to our next workshop. We can share any links to resources that you share with us, and just make sure to get that out to everyone so it's available. Yeah.
Okay, I have that ready. Lots of them. I know there were some comments in the chat, I believe, some folks were saying that they have trouble getting through to the Gerstein Center and the other chat lines. And that's why I tried to kind of provide so many different hotlines. I'm going to try and compile as many numbers as I can, because some groups have gotten like smaller hotlines for like different areas. People have been able to get funding for different projects. So I'm just going to look at how many resources I could add to that. And thank you for adding that, because again, even as I went and checked the sites last night to find out that the chat service isn't available, that's the feedback that's important. We need to know that where we're referring people to, they'll actually get help. I don't want to send a number to someone or, a hotline number that's busy where someone's not going to get someone that answers the phone. So thank you for who shared that comment. I don't really remember who did, but thank you for that. So I'll follow up with a few more resources as it relates to hotlines and the chat lines.
Could I share one thing, please?
Mhm.
Thank you. Cassandra, with the onset of the pandemic here in Parkdale, we started a mutual aid network. And we started a phone tree, where we have a WhatsApp chat group where we have pod leaders, and the pod leaders we create pod members. So I'm just wondering if maybe we could, start a healing circle around, creating a phone tree, pertaining to a healing circle. Maybe you start right here in the community, and so we could help people with the process of, we have a circle where people could gather and, talk about some of the things that they're experiencing, painful things. I know right now, just talking, I have a lot inside, in the last year and a half, I can't tell you how many people I know have died tragically. So it's like, oh my goodness. How do you, when you feel that pain inside for others, or even myself, my mom, died tragically also. How do you cope, So I'm just saying, I'm just thinking if I'm experiencing that, how much pain, maybe other people.
Yeah, no, and I'm sorry for your loss. And there's so much loss that people are experiencing in this last year where they haven't had the opportunity to share or to be supported, where, you'd be able to walk into your office and get that hug from your coworker. But I'm giving you your hug now. Like, I'm giving you the biggest virtual hug. I'd love to be a part of any group that we have. Like, I'm not from Parkdale, but you could make me an honorary Parkdalian, and I could, lead a healing circle for that. Because instead of connecting folks to a grief and loss group, let's make one in our own community. Like, and I could find other service providers that do, grief and loss support counseling, or any type of that could bring something else to the group. Like, let's do this together. We don't need to seek out to find what works for us. Maybe we just need to make this group based on, the folks that came into the session and said, we'd like to do more. Let's have more conversations. So I'd love to meet with you and see if that's something that we can do, because I definitely need a space. I definitely need a space where I can talk about the losses that I'm experiencing. And that could be great for me to have a safe space outside of work. So thank you for offering that to me, Berlan. This is us supporting each other, So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yes, and sending big love and hugs to you, Berlin, and thank you again for sharing. And it's true, it's something that so many folks are facing right now, is these impacts of grief and loss and trauma. We hear this on the day-to-day, and so just being here for one another, knowing we have supports in place is huge. I put in the chat, just in case folks do want to learn a little bit more about Mutual Aid Parkdale and how to get involved. There is currently a link there. And I will also put in the chat just a reminder to folks that we do have a continued series around these workshops. So today we had the chance to talk a lot about suicide prevention. Next week, it's another challenging and difficult but necessary topic around how to support survivors of sexual violence. And then moving from that space, we're also going to have an interactive self-defense workshop and the opportunity to talk more about transformative justice. So how can we start to build the systems and supports that are necessary that allow us to move away from our reliance on institutions and policing and really build out those kinds of community supports and care that we've kind of been talking about today during the chat and conversation. So thank you again for all of this. And thank you, Amy, as well for your comments on this. So unless there are any parting questions, maybe what we can do is just everyone, please take the rest of this evening just to take care of yourselves. We talked through some really heavy conversations. So if you're having remaining feelings, remember too that we also do have folks here for one another. I can put my phone number in the chat if anyone wants to talk. Teresa is an active listener who's still here, and maybe if anyone does need a space just to debrief a little bit more, we can continue to hold this space open. But once again, just want to say a huge, huge, huge thank you, Cassandra. Like, this was such a phenomenal workshop. I know I learned a lot. It sounds like many folks here did too, and it was a really necessary space to deal with a really difficult, challenging topic. So can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Berlin or Nadia, do you want to say any just closing remarks before we end?
Sure, Cassandra, and everybody on the call also, I just really want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to be in this space and, sharing my feelings. And Cassandra, I'm in debt to you. The information that you shared, it's amazing, and you give us, the statistics and, some of the things that's, around suicide. So I'm truly grateful for that. So I know I got my work cut out for me. And thank you for helping, give me the opportunity to start that process.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. This is the first of many meetings. This is my introduction to all of you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This is a tough topic for me to talk about. So this is all part of my process in healing and growing in my evolution as a person. So I appreciate that I had this opportunity to do this with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you, Nadia. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. You called down my phone how many times? I was like, oh, I have to call back Nadia. Sorry. Love you for that. You're amazing. You're amazing.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah, huge thanks, Nadia, for connecting us. What we usually do at the end of our calls is we just encourage everyone to go off mute and say their good nights and goodbyes and thank you. So please feel free to unmute yourself and say good night.
Thank you, everyone. Lots of
Good night,
love.
So much for the
Everybody.
presentation.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Is everyone
Thank you
okay?
for
Good
everything.
night, everyone. Thank you,
Bye.
Cassandra.
Night. Yeah.
Bye.
Good night.
Nighty
Thank you.
night. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cassandra.